So good morning. How you guys doing? Hey man, thanks for inviting me into your house. It looks super nice. I'm just kidding. I can't see your house. You like that? You guys laugh louder when you're not here than when you are. Anyways, who would have ever thought, man? We live in some really strange times, right? I mean, the Peebles Church of Christ having online church. I know, crazy, man, right? What's next? Like drive-through communion? But I got thinking about this, man. In the midst of all this strangeness, it really is hard to know what's an appropriate or reasonable way to think about what we're involved in. I mean, this virus has affected almost every part of our life. I mean, it's affected our kids' schooling. For many of you, it's affected your business. For most of us, it's just interrupted our daily routines and rhythms of life. And if you're anything like me, my thoughts and feelings about this whole thing have just been on a pendulum swinging back and forth. So I've gone from everywhere from being really concerned to being really annoyed, right? To being very worried about what this thing is, to being almost completely indifferent. And the question is, why are we like this? Well, I think we're like it because we're humans. We're finite. We're not God. And what that means is we don't have unlimited resources at our disposal. There's only so much of me. So I'm limited in what I can do. I'm limited in my energy. There comes a point when my energy runs out. I'm limited in my intelligence. There comes a point where I'm not smart enough to figure something out. Right? I'm limited in my power, in my perception, in my ability to handle things. So when we find ourselves in a situation, or we find ourselves in a circumstance that's bigger than us, and a lot of circumstances are, we find ourselves feeling uneasy, sometimes even fearful because we don't have enough. Maybe it's not enough security, maybe it's not enough power, maybe it's not enough knowledge, whatever it is, we find ourselves lacking in some regard because we're finite, and our response is unease and fear. Now, I think for us as Christians, it's not such a big deal that we have those initial feelings. I think to not have those feelings of concern or fear or worry might either be a sign that we're just naive, and naivety doesn't help anyone ever, does it? Or it might be a sign that we just don't fully appreciate life and the gravity of life. So I don't think so much the issue is that we have feelings of concern or worry or even fear, but rather the issue is, are we enslaved to them? Is that fear, is that concern, is that worry, is that anxiety, are they now dictating how I move through life? Is it that fear or that worry that's actually making decisions for me? Is it telling me how I'm to think about what I'm involved in? Is it controlling my mood and then how I interact with my neighbor or even with my family? Now, one of the things that I find fascinating is that the author of the book of Hebrews, he teaches us that the main power that the devil has in our life actually is the power of fear. And that when fear overtakes us, that's when we tend to sin. And if you think about it, more often than not, if you unpack why we hurt one another, if you get down to the root cause, whether from the times that we have intentionally hurt someone or whether it be the times that we've unintentionally, if you pull the curtain back, what you notice lying behind that oftentimes is fear. Not always, but oftentimes. That fear really is the cause of so much pain and hurt. I mean, think about it. Sometimes we fear not having enough. So what happens? I mean, we've seen this over the past week. We hoard. And we stop being generous to other people. Sometimes we have fear of just not being enough. Right? That we don't think that we're enough to handle whatever situation that we're in. So we begin to belittle and demean and overreact, whether when we fail or when someone else fails. Maybe it's fear that we just don't know enough. And we don't want to look like the idiot, the fool. So what do? We criticize people. And part of the reason that Jesus came is to liberate us from that mess, to free us from the enslaving fear there. So I want you to notice what the author of Hebrews says. He says, the reason that Christ came was that through his death, so we're talking about Jesus, that through Jesus' death, he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and to deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. It's a fantastic verse, man, because what it teaches us, right, is that the main weapon that the Satan uses in our lives is the weapon of fear. And that fear has the ability and has the power to enslave us. And once it enslaves us, that's when we begin to do the devil's bidding, you might say, or sin. And the good news of Jesus is that Jesus has come to bring us out of Egypt, to bring us out of slavery, to bring us right out of the house of fear. So a good question to think about this week is, hey man, like, is my initial response of concern or worry or anxiety, is it a normal one? Or have I become enslaved by those feelings? Because if not, why? Is it because I'm not following Christ? Or what's the deal? So actually in Mark chapter 3, when Jesus talks about his ministry, he'll describe his ministry actually as robbery. That he's broken into the devil's house, that he's broken into Egypt, that he's broken into death. And the reason he broke in there was to bind the strong man. Notice what he says. He says, but no one can enter a strong man's house. You can't march right into Egypt. You can't march right into death and plunder its goods unless you first bind the strong man. And then indeed you may plunder his house. Isn't that so good, man? So when Jesus is talking about what his ministry is, what he came to do, he says, man, I've busted right into Satan's house. I busted right into Egypt, right into death itself to tie up the strong man. You say, well, why does he want to tie up the strong man? To give you back your peace. I love this piece of artwork here. You can see right down here, it's got Christ's angels, man. They're tying up the strong man, binding him, right, because of what Christ has done on the cross, and they're just going to town. Why did Christ bind the strong man? To give you back your peace. To give you back your sanity, man. To give you back your freedom. How awesome is this story? That Christ came so you could have that. I really like how Leon Morris puts it. We've used this quote before, but man, it's worthwhile quoting it every day of the week. Morris said this. He says, evil has a strong grip on us, or on people, but that strong grip is broken decisively when the kingdom of God comes in. He says, the kingdom is not in beautiful words. There we go. The kingdom is not in beautiful words, but it is the overthrow of evil. Man, that's so good, right? Because the way evil works in our lives is it grips us. And the way it grips us is through fear. But for those of us who have followed Christ, when the kingdom breaks into our lives, it's the overthrow of fear. It's the overthrow of evil, and those chains have been broken. But now is when the rubber meets the road. Now is when the ball, you might say, is put in our court. So sure, the chains have been broken. Sure, the strong man has been bound. But you can choose to stay in the house of fear if you want. You don't have to follow Christ out. He came, bound the strong man, busted the doors open. But you can choose to stay there. Or you can follow him out into the light of day, into the light of peace. So you might think about it like this. There's two options we have in life. We can choose to be twisted by fear, by remaining in that house. Or we can take what's rightfully ours in Christ Jesus. Peace, security, hope, and joy by being informed by faith. So two ways. We can be twisted by fear or informed by faith. And I was thinking about this week as I was watching, every day they've got a news conference, trying to inform us. I'm thinking, that's really what we all want. We all want to be informed. We want that good information. We want to know what's really going on, because if we know what's really going on, we're able to make the right decision. We're able to say, all right, I know what I'm involved in. I know what this is going to take. That's what we want as good information. In fact, none of us like being lied to, do we? And none of us like the feeling of being bamboozled by fake news. What we want is good information. We want to be fully informed. So the question is, what's going on? What's going on here? What's the good information? How can we become fully informed? Well, I know this much for sure, that the Lord is your shepherd, and he's my shepherd, and I shall not want. I know that information to be true. I know he makes us lie down in green pastures. And he leads us beside still waters. And he restores my soul. It is Christ, it's my shepherd who gives me my peace. You say, well, how does he do this? Well, he leads us down the right paths, the paths of righteousness. But why does he lead us down the paths of righteousness? For his name's sake. It's his character that's on the line. It's his integrity that's on the line. He is the one that's promised to get you from point A to point B. Why? Because he's the shepherd. And he leads you down the right path for his name's sake. But he doesn't just lead us by green pastures and still waters, but we're also told that, man, sometimes he's going to lead us right through the valley of the shadow of death. But even when I'm there, I don't have to fear any evil. Remember, evil is designed to make you fear, which is why heaven's message to earth is always the same. Be at peace. But why don't we fear any evil? Because he is with me, and he's with you. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. Remember, the staff's to kind of pull you when you're about ready to fall off the cliff. Oh, gotcha, pull you back. The rod is to beat away predators. And both of those, the protection and the security of keeping me on the path, is what comfort me. I love the next line. Best part of the information, man. In the presence of my enemies. He said, he just prepares a table before me. I love that, man. All right, in the middle of the war, what does he say? Hey, Jason, sit down. Eat. Regain your strength. Take a deep breath. Be at peace. You've got a long journey ahead of you, son. Eat a good meal. And at this table, he anoints my head with oil. A sign of blessing and a sign of healing. And the cup that he pours for me, man, there's more than enough. It just keeps overflowing. But that's not even all of the information, because what we're told next is that surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. That's powerful stuff, man. Because for most of us, we think what's hot on our trail or on our tail, what's hunting us down is like failure or death or abandonment or disease. What's hunting me down, man, is tragedy. But not according to Psalm 23, man. What's hunting you down, what's hot on your tail, what's coming after you is goodness and mercy, God's goodness and mercy. But it's not just what's following me. Notice what he says, what lives out in front of me. That I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There you go. You've now been fully informed. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Here's a question. I don't know if you know this, but I know I like trivia. Might as well do something. Do you know where the earliest surviving piece of Christian artwork we have is found? Yeah, if you take a guess, you might think maybe in a monastery somewhere. Others might say, I don't know, a cathedral. Some might say in some museum. Now, interestingly enough, the oldest piece of Christian artwork that we have is actually found in a tomb, in a catacomb, actually, in the city of Rome. I've never been to Rome, but what I've been told by those who have been there is that Rome, in and around the city, there's about 550 miles of catacombs or tombs that are there. And as you can see, in some of them, there's artwork that's been placed there, and this is where they would bury people. In fact, most scholars think that at the height of the catacomb usage, around 6.5 million people would have been buried in those tombs. Now, what I find interesting is some of the paintings that they painted on those tombs. You find paintings like this. Paintings of Christ as the Good Shepherd. Now this picture, they think, is painted roughly around the year 250 AD. You can kind of see it up there. It's kind of blurry because it's very, very, very old. But you can see you got Christ and he's carrying the sheep, and there's some birds and all that kind of stuff there. And what's fascinating to me about this picture that they think is painted around 250 AD is you know what was happening in Rome around this time? Yeah, you got two things. You got this guy, this emperor, Decius, and he had just passed a law that said every person in Rome had to make a sacrifice to him as God, or as the emperor. You know, which doesn't mean anything to us, but for the Christians of that day, that meant that if they weren't going to do this, this meant death for them. So you have a rise of persecution amongst Christians. But also around this time, you have a deadly plague that was sweeping across the land. story is called Cyprian, the plague of Cyprian, not because Cyprian started it, because Cyprian, he was a bishop at the time, and he recorded this plague. I mean, at the height of this plague, around 5,000 people were dying, they think, a day in the city of Rome. So this is the world that these Christians found themselves in. A world of persecution and the world of plague. And what I find fascinating is that they weren't twisted by fear, but they allowed their faith to inform them. And the messages that ring out of those catacombs, thousands of years later, the information that's still written upon those walls is that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Isn't that awesome, man? Now, what I find fascinating about Psalm 23 is that it deals completely with the topic of security. So if you think about the topics that Psalm 23 addresses, it deals with the idea of want or lack. You don't have enough of something. It deals with evil. It deals with enemies. It deals with danger, and it deals with death. All in the same chapter. And it's a short chapter. You can probably memorize it. And you say, well, why does it deal with all that? Well, partly because that's the human experience, right? But also, if you think about what is a sheep without a shepherd? A sheep without a shepherd is in a place of want, right? I mean, a sheep without a shepherd is in the midst of evil. It is surrounded by predators that can kill it, and harm it, and destroy it. It is constantly in the middle of danger. A sheep without a shepherd is the epitome of what it means to be afraid, to be gripped by fear. But what Psalm 23 does is it informs us that we're not sheep without a shepherd, but rather it is the Lord who is our shepherd. It is the Lord who is our security. It is Christ who is our protection. In other words, what Psalm 23, the information that it gives us is that we can find peace. And the reason we can find peace is not because we magically now all of a sudden live in a world where there's no longer any want, where there's no longer any evil, where there's no longer any danger or death. To think that living in that kind of world is possible is probably the epitome of being naive. Psalm 23 doesn't promise us peace because we no longer have want, evil, danger, or death in our life. Psalm 23 says the reason you can have peace is because you have a shepherd. And my friends, that is a legit, I like that. That's a powerful message. That I am a sheep in King Jesus' flock. And because of that, ultimately, I am his responsibility. It's the shepherd's responsibility to protect the sheep, to provide for the sheep, to lead the sheep. Now, true, I got to follow him. I got a part to play. True, I got to accept being found. It's true, I got to stay close enough to him so he can protect me in danger. It's true, I got to eat the food that he sits before me. But nevertheless, what gives me my peace is, man, I'm his responsibility. He has promised to get me from point A to point B. And it's his responsibility to get me there. So either we are a sheep without a shepherd and we find ourselves alone in a very dangerous and broken world where we have to fend for ourselves, or we are a sheep who are in a very dangerous and broken world, but we have a shepherd. I like how one old preacher put it. He said, really there's two ways to think about life. There's two ways to understand the world. Fate or father. They're only separated by two letters, but man, there's a world of difference between the two. Either we live in a world of fate, or we sing the song, "This is my Father's world." And this is the conundrum for the unbeliever, right? For those who don't believe in God. If it's all just fate, then what's the point of being angry? What's the point of being frustrated? What's the point of being upset? What's the point of worrying or even learning? If it's all just fate, you might as well just save your breath and go with the flow because there's nothing you can do about it anyways. But if it truly is our Father's world, that's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? And partly because the thing about a good father is a father always has a lesson for his children. So one of the things I remember most about my father is it didn't matter what situation we found ourselves in. Whatever life would throw at us, Whether it be mundane things like leaves just falling on the ground and us having to rake them up, right? Or baling hay, or whether it be big events in life like a death of a family member or getting in trouble at school. Whether it be moments where we crashed our bike or even moments where we crashed our car. Whether it be playing sports where we won or where we lost. There was always something that our Father wanted to teach us in the light of that situation. Now, my dad didn't cause any of those situations. It's not like he caused the situation to teach me a lesson. Same with God. God doesn't cause situations to teach us lessons. But I think as a good father, he will always teach us. And in my Father's house at home, the lesson that he had for me was always very different than the lesson he had for my brother, even though the situation was the same. Why? Well, partly because he's a good dad, but what was lacking in me wasn't what was lacking in my brother. And my Father had the wisdom to see that. So the same situation, we were in two different lessons. I think the same is true with our Heavenly Father. We're all in this situation. No one's to blame. We can't throw blame on anyone or anything. It's not that God caused this so he can teach us. No. We're all in this situation. But like a good father, I do think he'll teach all of us a different lesson through it. There's always something we can learn through whatever we find ourselves in. And I imagine God giving us a book during this time. And maybe for some of us, the book's got a big fat title on it that says patience. And maybe what's lacking in me is patience. And me being involved in this is screaming at me and showing me, Jason, you're too impatient. Maybe for other of us, the word on the top is courage. And as I find myself navigating this situation, maybe what's screaming out to me is, Jason, you got to learn to be more courageous, man. Maybe for some, the title on the book is generosity. And we get involved in this situation, and what's screaming at us is, man, we're not generous at all. Maybe for others, it's forgiveness. Maybe what's lacking in us is forgiveness. Maybe for some, it's trust. What's lacking is my trust that Christ is the shepherd. But I think for most of us, at least one book that we're all going to have to read during this time is the book called Gratitude. Because it's in times like this, when things are out of control, when things are difficult, when life is not going as planned, that it's so easy to get focused on what's not going well. It's so easy to get focused on all the things now that I can't do. It's so easy to get focused on all the things that aren't working and that I don't understand, right? And that don't make sense. It's so easy during this time to fail to be able to say the words, thank you. But the truth is, man, without gratitude, all things rot. They rot. I like what Karl Barth said. Isn't he a funny looking dude? Look at that, man. I'm telling you, Karl Barth's the man. That's a great picture. He said, thank you is the only prayer that you ever say. That prayer is enough. Are you able to say thank you? So one of my most favorite paintings, I got a lot of paintings that I like, but is this one. It's called The Incredulity of Thomas. Man, it's a powerful, powerful picture in more ways than one. And it recounts the story of doubting Thomas. You know, Christ, he was in prison. Thomas said, I'm not going to believe unless I can touch the scars, and then he still doubted. But the thing I like about this picture so much is here's Thomas, man. And he's just a real guy. I mean, look at his clothes. They're tattered and torn. I mean, look at his face. Like, you can see on his face the marks of disappointment and struggle and the pain of life that he's been through. Look at his eyes. Because what's staring right in front of him is the surprise that came through suffering. The surprise that came through suffering. Like, who would have thought, man, that out of the mess of crucifixion, 3 days earlier, out of the mess of that God would be able to bring this gift and put it in front of Thomas. Standing right in front of him is this gift, and yet life has beat Thomas down so much that as he's staring at the gift, he doesn't know whether to doubt or to believe. Dude, just talk about an awesome picture, right? I mean, how often have we been there? You think, God, I don't know how you can bring any good out of this mess. And yet when you come through the other side of it, you're staring at it and you don't know whether to doubt or believe the gift that has been given to you in light of this. You don't know whether to say, I don't know, or to say thank you. Great picture, isn't it? So are you able to say thank you? Maybe we start here. One of my most favorite verses in Hebrews is Hebrews chapter 1, and it says, He, as Christ, upholds the universe by the word of his power. Man, I love that verse. Christ upholds the universe by the word of his power. And the reason I like it so much is because while everything else seems to have come to a screeching halt, like spring hasn't gotten the memo. Have you noticed this? Like, while everything else is shut down, the trees haven't got the memo to stop making leaves. You know, the birds haven't got the memo to stop singing. The sun hasn't gotten the memo to stop coming up faithfully on time every morning. And when I look outside, I am reminded that Christ is on the throne. That the Lord is my shepherd. That Christ has promised to get me from point A to point B, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And as I read the book of generosity that God has handed me to learn from, what it's teaching me is that I need to be on the lookout for blessings. They're all around me, God's gift and God's mercies, but I've just not been looking well enough. And what the book is teaching me is maybe the more that I look, maybe the more I'll find. Because it's true, man. It's true. If you want to remain gloomy, if you want to remain miserable, if you want to remain depressed, if you want to just think that life is just getting worse and worse and worse, man, there's enough around you to keep that narrative going. There's enough out there to keep you gloomy, miserable, and depressed. But if you want to be glad, if you want to have peace, if you want to be filled with joy, I think Jesus' message to you is just start looking, man. Let me end with this. We had some downtime this past week, like I'm sure a lot of you had, and I was able to watch this documentary, Mr. Rogers. Dude, you guys like that show? Oh my goodness. I was having flashbacks, man, as I was watching this documentary of Mr. Rogers from my childhood. Like, it's just a great show. Well, anyways, so I'm watching this thing, and you come to find out, like, Fred Rogers is actually Mr. Rogers, man. Like, they're the same person. Like, he wasn't acting. Like, that's just him. But anyways, there's this moment in the documentary where they're asking him, they're saying, Fred, what do you do when you have a bad day, man? Because it looks like you never have one. And he talked about a lot of things that he did, playing the piano, and et cetera, et cetera. But the one that stood out to me the most is he said, well, whenever I'm having a bad day, I take a minute of silence. They said, a minute of silence? Why? He said, I quiet myself, and I think about all the people who've helped make me the person that I am today. He said, I take a minute and I quiet myself, and I imagine, I see all the people who've loved me, all the people who encouraged me, all the people who made a sacrifice for me, all the people who gave something to help me be the man that I am today, all those people that wanted me to succeed in life. And I remember how grateful I am for them. And that turns my gloom into joy. Without gratitude, man, all things rot. So better to lose track of counting our blessings than to lose our blessings in counting our troubles. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. And may he give you his peace. You guys have a wonderful day.